Today, we're digging into a really fascinating idea from writer Sam Bunce. It's a theory that might just explain, well, everything about Gen Z's cultural landscape. The idea is that they're the first generation in history to live completely inside something called the archive. So let's just jump right in with the big question that kicks this whole thing off. Have you ever noticed that Gen Z's taste in music is kind of like a time machine? I mean, they're pulling from every decade at once, and it seems like it doesn't even matter when a song actually came out. So that brings us to part one, this generational mystery. How can they listen to everything and somehow nothing all at the same time? And you know where this whole investigation starts? As it so often does, in a bar. Okay, so picture this. The author, Sam Bunce, is at a bar, and he's right in the middle of a debate about this exact topic. So he decides to do a little, on-the-spot journalism. He goes up to two random Zoomers and asks them what they listen to. He's expecting to hear about some super obscure avant-garde new artist, right? But what do they say? Nirvana and 90s music. Just straight up. And that little moment sparked this huge insight for Bunce. He realized that platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, and especially TikTok, they serve up music totally stripped of its history and context. Think about it. A song by Kate Bush from the 80s can suddenly become a massive hit today because the algorithm just pushes it to you. It feels just as new, just as relevant as a song that dropped yesterday. And look, this isn't just some random story from a bar. The data actually backs this up big time. A Spotify Trends expert confirmed it. Gen Z's listening habits are incredibly wide-ranging, and they dive deep into old music catalogs. We're talking about artists like Miles Davis, The Grateful Dead, and Joan Jett showing up in their most listened to tracks. It's wild. So, what does all of this mean? How does it all connect? Well, it all leads to this core theory, the concept of the archive. Bunce describes it as a Borgesian labyrinth. And if you don't know what that means, just imagine an infinite library that contains every book ever written. But there's no card catalog. There's no system to make sense of any of it. So let's really define the archive. What is it? It's this state we're in where all of recorded culture, every song, every movie, every book, is right there at your fingertips. It's all equally available. But because of that, it's also equally weightless. Nothing feels more important than anything else because it's all just sitting there together in one huge, flat digital space. Now, this is a massive fundamental shift in how culture works. For pretty much all of history, culture moved in a straight line, right? One generation would react to the one before it. Bob Dylan was responding to Woody Guthrie. But in what Bunce calls archival time, a new artist today gets hit with everything all at once. Dylan, Guthrie, Beethoven, and whatever's number one on the charts right now. It's all coming at you on the same level at the same time. And living like this has some pretty profound consequences. I mean, when you're staring at an infinite library of stuff, time itself can start to feel broken. That old traditional chain of influence, it just shatters. And what Bunce argues is that this creates this deep underlying anxiety and, honestly, a paralysis of choice. Just think about it. How are you supposed to create something new and authentic when you feel like you have to respond to everything that has ever been made? Okay, so this idea that the creative chain is broken, it's a big one. And to really get our heads around what's been lost, Bunce takes us way, way back, all the way to Plato and his theory of inspiration. So Plato had this amazing metaphor. In one of his dialogues, he described inspiration as being like a magnetic force. The muse is the magnet. The very first artist is like an iron filing that snaps right onto that magnet. And then every artist in every generation that comes after is like another iron filing clinging to the one before it, carrying that same magnetic energy down through time. It's a beautiful image, right? You can just picture it, the muse, the first artist, and all these generational links creating a perfect chain of influence. But the theory here is that for Gen Z, living inside the archive, that chain is broken. The iron filings are just scattered everywhere, unable to connect to each other or to that original magnetic source of inspiration. All right, so if that chain of influence, that whole process of reacting to what came before is broken, then what happens to one of the most powerful engines of new culture? What happens to rebellion? Just think about the contrast here for a second. Subcultures of the past, like punk or grunge, they were born in real physical places. Sweaty dive bars. They had this raw, chaotic, in-person energy. But the argument goes that today's so-called subcultures, they mostly exist on Discord servers. They feel way more disconnected, almost agoraphobic, kind of like an online role-playing game.
So, what this really means is that it's less about building a new movement from the ground up, and it's much more about adopting the aesthetics of past movements. You're just putting on the costumes. It becomes more about curation and, yeah, cosplay than it is about creating a genuinely new cultural force.
And all of this, it leads to a really big, kind of unsettling final question. What if this is it? What if this is the end of the line? What happens to a culture when it gets trapped inside the archive, just endlessly curating and rearranging the past? Well, the writer points to this old novel by Hermann Hesse called The Glass Bead Game as a kind of cautionary tale, a possible roadmap for where we're headed. In that book, society has completely stopped creating new art. All they do is have this intellectual elite that just endlessly reviews, synthesizes, and plays these complex games with all the culture of the past. It's literally a cultural end of history.
And look, this isn't just some wild fringe idea. The great novelist Cormac McCarthy basically said the same thing. He worried that just the sheer volume of things would eventually devalue them all. I mean, his point was, if you had thousands of ancient Greek plays to read instead of just a few, would they still feel so special? He didn't think so.
And that really brings us to the heart of the problem today, doesn't it? We've solved the problem of access. We can get our hands on pretty much anything we could ever want instantly. But in doing that, we've created a much, much harder problem. The problem of selection. When you're floating in this great gray sea of infinite content, where do you even start? Where do you put your attention? And Bunce doesn't really offer an easy answer. He just leaves us with this huge, lingering question for our time. In a world that's now living inside the archive, is it even possible for the links of that creative chain to ever reconnect? The future of culture might just depend on how we answer that.